Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Today's topic deals with human rights or civil rights, but with very important emphasis on African American history. And we're so pleased to have such a highly qualified guest to address this very important subject. I welcome to the program Nancy Nelson. She holds a baccalaureate degree in liberal arts with a concentration in African American music history, a master's degree in education with a focus on African American issues. She is also at this time a PhD candidate in education. Her 2 degrees are from Antioch University in Seattle. She's now associated with Eastern Washington University. I think of our guest as a Renaissance person. She is a speaker, a singer, a nationally recognized doll artist, a published poet, many, many things that our guest does. Ms. Nelson, welcome to the program. It's a delightful opportunity to have you here to talk about all these interesting topics.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm pleased to have our regular panelists, Erna Reinhardt, who's the Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and a visiting panel member, and also has been a guest in playing Chautauqua roles in the past, is from our history department, our faculty colleague, Charla Chittick Trainer. Thank you both for being here. We'll invite Erna Reinhardt to commence today's questioning.
Hi, Nancy, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you on our campus today. I want, first of all, for you to take a few minutes and share with our viewers a little bit about what you do in your position at Eastern Washington University. I know that you are the Director of African American Education, but tell us a little bit about what that all entails.
Well, with African American Education program at Eastern, it has 2 parts. There's the African American Studies part, where you can get a minor or just takes classes in it, and then there's the student support part. So we offer several classes in African American history and culture. We're cross-listed with some of the other departments on campus. And then on the student support side, we do advising, recruiting, retention. We bring in speakers, advocate for students. We do a lot. It's a pretty big part of the program.
Awesome. One of the things that you do, I went to your website, and one of the things that you do is a lot of presentations yourself. You are very involved in theater and do a lot of music. Tell us a little bit about the presentations that you do to different groups.
Well, there's the one I did here today, which is one of my favorites. It's on the issue of African American women and the hair and how it relates to cultural identity. Talks about the history of our hair in Africa and in this country. And I have several that I do on the Negro spirituals, which is my passion, is Negro spirituals. And there's one on slave women, how did they survive? And there's another one I call Lift in Every Voice that I do with my older brother who plays African drums as accompaniment. There's a lot of them.
And do all of them have a combination of the music and speaking? I mean, I think it's neat that you bring the music into the presentation. I think that's awesome.
They have to have at least one song. Yeah.
Right.
And there's another one that's on, But I'm Only One Person, and it shows what some of the historical figures have done as one person to encourage other people to not think they can't do things. So there's quite a few of them.
Awesome.
Charla?
Do you find there's a recurring message that comes out? I mean, I know each one of the topics seem to be very separate in a way, but is there a recurring theme that you see throughout those topics that really make an impact on the audience and on yourself?
They're mostly for people to get an understanding of African Americans, African American culture. So in that way, it's reoccurring. I would see that, but and some of them are to build self-pride in African Americans themselves as to what their history is and to really understand what the history is and why it was that way and why the culture is the way it is today.
Today when you talked about the the hair. One of the things that you focused on very early on is that the building of self-esteem. And I think everybody in the room connects at some point through peer pressure or some form of social impact that has to do with that. Could you talk just a little bit about how the hair and the history of Black culture, what kind of an impact that has on self-esteem and
Very briefly,
Yeah.
that's a tough one.
just a little bit.
Because there's so many issues in our hair, in our culture with our hair, as to whether we're trying to look white, if we're trying to go away from being Black or being African American by straightening it, or is that just another way of styling your hair? People who wear the more Afrocentric hairstyles, are they being too ethnic, or are they more in touch with being African American than those who choose to put chemicals in their hair? And do people straighten their hair because they have a low self-image, which some people believe is true, and some people just believe they do it because that's the way they style their hair.
Like it.
Yeah, they like it. So it's a very complicated issue. And I've been studying it for some time, and there's just more books and more films and more information coming out on it all the time.
And that one of your great talents, and I indicated that and introduced you, that is music. And I know when you do your speaking that you performed today, you were performing music too. In my study of human rights or civil rights, even internationally and globally, it seems to be that the common connecting theme is in the field of music. And certainly the civil rights movement in the United States, the late Dr. Martin Luther King and others have illustrated how incredibly powerful it is. Would you share with our viewers why you think that is so, and why that music can connect us together across many cultural lines, and how powerful it is, or why?
Well, there's one show that I do that has a lot, that's How Did They Survive? And it's on African American, how the slave women, and how they're able to survive that period of slavery. And one of the ways that they were able to do it was through the music. And it's said that the Negro spirituals were the first American music by non-natives. And that music was still used today because of the power in that music, that it was able to get them through their worst trials. And it was used to send messages. It was used to heal. Motherless Child was a song that was performed, that people would sing when they had sunk so low that nothing could help them, that no one could help them. And when a person would sing that song, they would often be left alone in their grief because they knew they had gotten that low. But when you're singing music, your space is protected. No matter what a person does to you physically, you are mentally, spiritually protected. And that's why those same songs, the Civil Rights Movement used the same songs that were used back in the slave period. And they would sing, the people would sing in the churches, and as they went out into the streets, they would keep singing because the music was what gave them the strength and protected them. I mean, they would sing so much that even in some of the jails, they would be told to stop singing. You know, it was just that powerful. It had that much meaning. Music can give you a lot of strength and get you through a lot of different things. The right songs.
It overcomes the language barriers too. If I might just very quickly give you a footnote, I have taken students to Europe to study, and one year we went to the Soviet Union while it was a totalitarian system under the communists, and we went out to a country area where there was a beautiful, for the Russian Orthodox Church, a great cathedral, and it was very poor in the economy. And as we went into this to visit this service, the women, the peasant women, were sitting around the walls and singing, and all it was in Russian. There was a great power there, and it's very spiritual. So I just want to make that note. It really connects with you, and they were singing about their trials and tribulations and the loss of people that they had in their life. And you remind me of that. I just want to make that footnote. Back to Erna.
I'm intrigued with your thoughts that you just had a moment ago about the songs and the women in slavery. How did those songs originate, and were they localized, or how did they get did different peoples in different parts of the country have the same song, or were they very regionalized?
There were thousands and thousands of songs that you'll never know. I mean, because in the music was such a part of Africa, the African culture, where it's not as we have it in this culture. You go and you hear someone on stage. Where in the African cultures, it was a part of everyday life. You would sing as you did everything, and when the enslaved people were brought here, they did the same things, but they made them up. Mm-hmm. You would make up the words. What you hear now is not what was originally sung. Some of the words may be, but the way they were sung isn't the same way anymore because the life isn't there, and because they were changed a lot to adjust to audiences with a particular ear. But people would make up the songs as they needed to. Mm-hmm. And some songs would travel as they were sold and moved to different states, in different parts of the states. Then you would carry those same songs with you. But there were thousands. I remember the Johnson brothers tried very hard to collect as many of those songs as they could. But most of them are lost.
Interesting.
Charlotte?
You know, it's interesting. My students this week are taking an essay exam, and poor souls.
Yes.
And one of the questions talks about how when we look at different civilizations, we see a lot of the same things over and over again, but the difference is in culture, it's in expression. And already, you know, you talked today about hair, and now we talk about music. I know clothing and jewelry, there's so many just aspects of expression that seem to have originated, of course, in Africa and then find their way this way. I'm curious of some of the ones that are more dominant, some that you could perhaps mention, jewelry, hair, clothing, anything that seems to be real dominant in this day and age right now that has that long history back to Africa.
I'm not sure I'm real
I think
clear.
of the wraps, hair wraps, or
the different hairstyles. Well, you know, in the 60s, that's when people started, African American people started to wear more African styles.
It's more acceptable.
It became a statement.
Yeah.
And so now it's interwoven into the styles, and some people wear exclusively Afrocentric styles, and some of us just incorporate parts of it. I know when we have big banquets and dinners, a lot of times they request that you wear African dress. It depends so much on the person. Our culture is so broad and different that some people like to wear the more Afrocentric. I wear Afrocentric dress sometimes, and some of my clothes are, and some of mine don't have any resemblance to it at all. But it's pretty individual. Is that?
Yeah, I love how the Afro is coming back. I see a lot of people that are bringing it back, and it seems it went away for a little while.
It's a lot of work.
And it is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So I have a different style of Afro. I put it in the middle and divide it down. But yeah, more. I think more men are wearing Afros now. But it's a lot of work.
In your earlier comments and also dealing with your background, you talked about that there have been very special individuals all over the world, and in our democracy here, certainly, we've had individuals that have been so powerful in helping move us to a greater understanding and celebration of democracy. Would you share with us one or two individuals that you admire so much that you thought, and this helps other people have courage for the future, but that you admire so much that help bring change, help get us closer to what that principle of democracy is all about, or freedom and equality?
Well, it's Bernice Johnson Reagan, who is the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, and she's a curator, I believe, with the Smithsonian. And through their music, they talk about so many different issues of African American issues, of women's issues, and I remember seeing them when they were just starting out, and now they've been around over 25 years. But the messages that they're able to deliver through the music is just incredible. And she's put out books and has written songs. She's an amazing woman. I mean, she was thrown out of college because of her activities in the civil rights movement. She was actually expelled from college. and still went on to get a doctorate. You know, so she's quite an inspiration, a woman who stood by her beliefs and took some heavy losses to reach where she is now.
Individuals like that become great models for others in the future, don't they? Or give them courage. And
she's a great model for me, to have gone through that much and still, I mean, because you think, it's particularly African Americans think that once you've failed in something, like once you're thrown out of school, that's it, it's over. And here's a person who's expelled from school, and she goes on and gets a doctorate. She's in this great position, and she sings. She has this group that sings all over the world. I mean, it's fantastic music, writes music. She's very inspirational to me.
Thank you. That's a great story.
That's great.
Erna.
February is Black History Month, and I want to talk a little bit about our youth of today. Being a parent, I always bring in the youthful questions, but tell me why it's important that we keep Black history alive. Or how we do that, not so much why, because I think it is very important, but how can we, how do we do that?
If you don't include Black history, you can't have American history. I mean, and that's, I mean, it's sad to me that we still need Black History Month. And we still need it because the other 11 months is not taught at all. It's not incorporated into the history of America. And I fail to understand how they can separate it out when African Americans have done so much. And not just, without slavery, I don't know if this country would have happened at all, without the slave labor, without the inventions that African Americans have come up with, without their participation, and they've participated in every single war in this country. Would the wars have been won without us in it? You know, and it's sad to me that it has to be a separate history. Also, with the negative parts of the history, if you don't know, if the history isn't taught, then it's apt to repeat itself. And so it's important that everybody knows the history and knows what happened. Also to understand why some of the policies and laws and regulations are in place today are because of things that happened because of African American history. So all that's important to understand. Carter Woodson's, who is the father who started Negro History Week, which is now Black History Month, said that a people with no history lend themselves to extinction. You know, you have to know where you came from to know why you're where you are and to be able to direct where you're going. And it's important for everybody else to know what African Americans have done in this country.
Excellent.
I always feel like at a community college level, when we get the opportunity for someone to come from a four-year school, I want to pick their brain. What can we do to be like you? I'm curious, you know, being in this area, we work really hard. We've got a number of committees where we're working really hard on working with cultural diversity, bringing in diversity, expanding our programs, working with diverse students. And I guess my question would be if you have suggestions for a direction that we can go, or something that has worked perhaps at Eastern in getting us more to that level.
One of the things I've done is I've tried to connect with every department at Eastern. And our board and our president has just come up with a big commitment towards diversity in having the faculty reflect the population at the school, and looking at more ways that we can work on that. Our classes, it's wonderful, our classes are always full. We have some of the largest classes in the university because people are really interested. I think now people are very interested in learning about other cultures, more so than before. One of the things I would love to see happen at Eastern is, because we're in such an isolated area, because even Eastern, you know, Cheney, who's heard of Cheney? You know, if you're not over here, is to do the civil rights tours, to actually take students to the South and do the civil rights tours, do the Underground Railroad tours. Because we can keep talking to people, but until you actually experience it and see what it's like outside of here, then you get a much more of an appreciation for it. I try to encourage our students to go to the black churches in Spokane you know, because that's where most of our culture is. I said, you see kids all over the place because our kids go to the same service. And I said, and it's hard to tell who's unless you know, because each person takes responsibility. They're everybody's child in that church. But those are some of the things I'm working on, and continuing to bring speakers in. We have Carl Mack coming this Friday, and we had a student who spearheaded bringing LaVon Bird Harris. She's coming Monday. James Harris' sister, she'll be there on Monday. We have another student who is bringing Jane Elliott. He spearheaded that, The Bluest Eye. So what's fortunate for us is we have more students who are interested in doing this work, so that it's not all on us.
Yeah.
But I would like, another one of my dreams is to do an actual faculty exchange and a student exchange with the Historic Black College. You know, because I think you have to get out of this environment and really experience it. You know, and I think that would be a fabulous learning tool.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. And Mr. Mack, I have been present. I was on a program with him, and he's very powerful.
Isn't he, though?
He's very, very effective presenter, and just so educational in listening to him. We all are involved in education and at our institution here, and we've worked with Eastern Washington University on a number of things. And I commend your university on some things they're doing in developing certain programs, and with your program in particular, there's a lot of commitment there. When my question has to do with your perception and idea of how are we progressing, in what areas are we making progress, in what areas that we are not, or what challenges that lie ahead for us in dealing with all this very large arena of dealing with human rights. And I'd just love to get your opinion on where you think we are at this point.
I think we've come a long ways. I look at how things were when I was a kid, and how much I tell the students, I said, you know, a few years ago you wouldn't be in a class. Well, there wouldn't even be this class. And you wouldn't be in here with students of other cultures. And they look at me with these, you know, dazed looks on their faces. And it's like, yeah, it was all separate. I said we weren't even accepted in colleges until the 1970s. Women weren't accepted in most of the colleges until the 1970s. And so I talk about how much things have changed and how they are now the change agents, because they're willing and interested in learning about other cultures. In education, some of the education majors are really interested in learning about the cultures that they're going to be working with. And that's when the changes are going to come. I really think it's a slow process, and that it's going to be a generational process, because you still have people with the old mindsets who are teaching their children, who are teaching their children. But from where we were, we've come an awfully long ways, you know, a very long way.
It's very important to hear your opinion, and I appreciate that, and we take courage in that. Erna Reinhardt.
I'm always interested and fascinated in how people get where they are. So this is a little bit of a personal question in terms of, you went back to school as a non-traditional student, a little bit older, and hopefully there's some viewers out there that you may inspire that, you know, it's never too late to go back to school. Could you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to go on that journey?
Well, first I'll tell you, my grandmother, because, many years ago, African Americans usually didn't go to high school. There were very few high schools available. My grandmother was in her 70s when she went to high school.
Oh my God.
And received her degree. So, you know, I have this great role model right there.
Right.
But actually I went back partly out of frustration, because I'd studied African American history and issues for so many years. That's been my passion, and people don't tend to listen to you too much without those little credentials. You know, I'm told when I get the doctorate, more people will listen to me. I said, fine, you know.
It'll really increase.
Yeah, suddenly I'll be a real authority on everything that I've known for the last 25 years. But also, in my studying, I was really looking at how much people sacrificed for education. And I was just pretty much snubbing my nose at going to college. And I started to feel very guilty about doing that. And the other thing is I was looking at what was happening at that time with the gangs and with the younger kids. And I kept saying if they knew their history, they couldn't possibly behave this way. Mm-hmm. They couldn't possibly shoot each other. They couldn't possibly be doing drugs if they knew where they came from. Because so many people think that because there's so much negativity in our history, that it is hard to deal with, but we're here. I said, look, I mean, I'm working on a doctorate. There are many people with doctorates, with bachelors, who own companies. You know, look at what we've done in a very short time period. When you figure with 1865, and then all those 100 more years of the Jim Crow laws, of the legal segregation, and look at all that we've accomplished. We were supposed to be extinct by the 1920s. And yet, here we are, and the pride that would instill in people. And so those were the things that motivated me to go back to school. I wanted to get into higher education, to teach. Actually, my first idea was to teach teachers, because I wanted them to work with our students in a different way, in a more effective way, a more positive way. And so that's what inspired me. And then, of course, well, luckily we're out here. My mother won't hear this.
Unless she watches this
Unless she
program.
watches. She's in Connecticut. I'm pretty
Okay,
safe.
we don't go that far.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty safe. But when I got my master's, I was so excited. You know, finally. I mean, I'd gone through this thesis. I'd rewritten it so many times that I said, if I have to do this again, I'm not graduating. That's it. I'm done. So my advisor calls. He says it's done. I've got my master's. First person I call is my mother, and I sit there and I wait for this. You know, these wonderful words of praise. And she says, well, just remember, there's always more to learn.
A typical mother's answer.
So now I'm working on the doctorate, you know, because she's right. There's always more to learn.
Bless her heart. Well, on that note, we have to bring the program to conclusion. Nancy Nelson, you've been such a pleasure to have on the program. You're so articulate and you're inspiring. And thank you for being with us. I know our audience will appreciate it deeply. And good luck to you in your work. And thank the panel for their questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will be with us next week when we'll shift to yet another issue. We so enjoy bringing a variety of issues to you. And until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.